Welcome to the Buff Show. Today we have Ben Larson. He's an agent with Mountain Buff Real Estate, and Andi Snedden. She is an escrow officer and a huge resource to us. So we have her in the hot seat today. We're going to ask her some questions about the title industry, just what are some of the most common questions we get, and she's going to educate us on that. So
I'm going to try.
Yeah.
My very best.
Well, welcome, Andi. Let's start off with like a little bit about yourself, who you are, your background, stuff like that.
My name is Andi Snedden. I have been in the title and escrow business for 13 years. Prior to that, I was in the lending side. I worked for some different banks, eventually got into the home equity side, and then went into title and escrow from there. I've been married to my husband, Brody, for 25 years. We have one son. His name's Brewer. He is currently serving in the United States Navy, so I'm proud of that.
That is so cool.
So, but yeah, just chilling out on the title side now.
Awesome. Well, we're lucky to have you, so thank you. And we got Ben here.
Yep. So I actually met Andi before I was even an agent. She helped me on my very first home purchase. And I remember we had a weird schedule. So she met us at like 9 o'clock at night in a business development resource center. And we signed papers all night long because our schedules wouldn't work. So, and since that day, we've been using Andi, and I recommend her and a lot of others to everybody else I use. So she's awesome.
When you've personally used her on quite a few deals.
Yeah, all of my deals, I think, actually.
Yeah.
I've used Andi as my personal. So, but she goes above and beyond.
She really does.
She's next level. It's not just a job for her. She actually cares about what you're doing. So.
Yeah. So let's jump into it. Andi, what is like a title company and what is an escrow officer?
So, title company, we are in the business to provide title insurance. What title insurance is it's a product that we issue that protects the homeowner from events of the past. So it's different than your standard casualty property insurance, right? We protect of events in the past, not events of the future.
Yeah.
There are some caveats to that because there are some things that we could protect for future, more so the past. So we want to make sure that when someone is buying or selling their home, they have the right and free and clear title to that home once they're done with the transaction. So the title insurance covers that. We've gone through and done a search on everything and made sure, things are taken care of. So, and that's what the title insurance is for. As far as escrow officer, I am the neutral third party in a transaction. So you want to make sure that you have your lender, your agent, and the neutral third party that's watching out for the buyer or seller in that transaction to make sure that everything's done correctly and completely in the file, kind of with compliance and things like that.
Yeah. It's it is cool having a title company involved. Like most people are like, why do we need title companies? They don't understand exactly what you guys do, and that's why we're doing this. But there's so much history that is involved with homes, and the idea is like you want to get what you're being represented when you're buying the house. You don't want to be carrying over, say, when the house was built, the builder didn't pay the roofer and they put a mechanics lien on the house. You don't want to inherit that. And people don't think about that stuff.
Exactly. That's
What's an example that you've had that you protect against it, so we can actually understand what the insurance actually protects you from?
just what Peyton's talking about. So if you are building a home, you have all these subcontractors that are out there doing work on the home. And now, I think it was in 2010. Don't quote me. I can't remember for sure. But when they put into place what's called the state construction registry. And so what that is anybody that does work on a property should go in and file a preliminary notice on the state construction registry. And that puts them in lien position on the property, essentially, for their project, for whatever they're doing. So like Peyton said, when we're doing title work, we want to protect people from having those liens still on their property once they actually buy the home, move into the home.
Yeah.
So we actually have to, as part of our title search, we pull the SCR to see if there's any preliminary reports on there. If there are, we have to find out who has filed those, and then we have to contact them and get either a lien waiver that shows a zero balance or a payoff from them, and we have to make sure that that's paid off or released prior to closing, so there are no liens on the property. So that's our biggest thing, is that we want to protect buyers and sellers from having liens remaining or liens on the property when they purchase. The homeowner's policy of title insurance covers the seller and buyer in a sense, but the seller's providing that to the buyer
Right.
in a transaction to say that we're giving you title to the property free and clear of any liens. And that's what the homeowner's policy is covering, or the owner's policy.
Yeah. So I recently had a deal. It was probably about a year ago. But every year I run into a few title issues on deals where, and it could be as much as like, hey, the sellers had a judgment against them, and then that kind of got linked to the house in a way, and that's got to be paid off at closing or something like that. But I had a deal where we were selling some land. It was like 20 acres, just beautiful piece of land. But the neighbors were kind of in a quarrel, and one of the neighbors filed a notice of interest on the property. Like, we didn't really know what for, but like we saw that pop up and we're like, wait, the buyer doesn't want to inherit that. Like, we don't know exactly what that entailed. And so we worked like diligently with the title company to get it cleared. But those are things like most buyers are just like, they're so focused on like what they can see. Is the roof good? Like, are the due diligence items checking out?
Right.
They don't think about, or an easement, you know?
Yep.
That's another big one I ran into. Like, there's utility easements, all these different kinds of easements that can be recorded against a property. And that can affect, you know, if you want to build a shop or an outbuilding, or if you're buying a lot, where you're going to place your house. Like, all
Right.
those things that affect the value of the property. And if you don't know exactly what those are, like you're walking blind into a deal.
Exactly. And that's the thing too, like, again, things that affect title aren't just a lien. They're not just a builder lien on the property. They're not
Yeah.
just a mortgage. But when we do title searches, we have to check all the parties involved to make
Yeah.
sure that there are no divorces, bankruptcies, judgments
Right.
on title, because all of that affect title
Yeah.
if there is something out there. And again, can carry, you know, we need to make sure that all of that's cleared. Divorce situation, that's one that, you know, people don't really think about. And some people might think, well, it's private. Why do I need to deal with that? Why do I need to let you know anything about that? But
Right.
what comes up with that is, if a couple is splitting and they both have interest in the property, then they may need to have equity split. And so a lot of times that information is provided in a divorce decree. And we as the title company have to follow what the divorce decree says, because it's a legal document. It was filed legally in the courts.
Yeah.
So again, we've had instances where people are like, well, I don't think we needed it, you know, but we do have to follow stuff like that. And again, neutral third party, that's kind of where we come in, and we're like protecting the buyer or seller in the transaction. Because I've had situations where I've had, you know, agents or lenders be like, no, we don't need that. And I'm like, yeah, we do.
Right.
It has to be taken care of.
Right.
So I think most importantly, you want to make sure you're working with an agent that you know knows the tidbits, the little
Right,
pieces,
yeah.
you know, on the title side of things.
I'm definitely no expert when it comes to title, but that's why we partner with great people, because I can't be a perfect agent, lender, and title officer. Like, I'm there to be a good agent and then partner with people that are experts in the other fields.
Right.
So I think a lot of people might not understand or realize this, but typically in a real estate transaction, there's two different policies being issued. Can we go over that? 'Cause like Ben was just talking about this today, about the cash deal and all that. So like, let's break that down. You have like an owner's policy and then a lender's policy, and who can pick those and all of that.
Right. So with title, you actually have an owner's policy, a homeowner's policy, and a lender's policy. So the owner's policy and the homeowner's policy are similar. The owner's policy is typically a policy that's used whenever it's raw land or development, where they haven't got the house on a homeowner's policy.
Right.
Kind of says what it is, right?
Yeah.
Homeowners that has a home on the property.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lender's policy. So when you're selling a home, you're going to be providing an owner's or a homeowner's policy to the buyer in the transaction. Per the real estate purchase contract, it actually states in section 6.1 that the seller is to provide the buyer with an owner's policy or a homeowner's policy in the transaction, depending on what's available. Certain properties may not qualify for a homeowner property or for a homeowner policy. Some underwriters have certain guidelines as to lot size and sales price per what they're going to issue. So acreage, things like that. So the lender's policy is actually a policy that's paid for by the buyer. If they are doing a loan, they buy a lender's policy for the lender. It protects the lender. It doesn't protect the buyer in the transaction, but it protects the lender and puts the lender in first position lien on that property to make sure that they are in first position, everything has been cleared, and they're going to have their lien perfected on that property. So if anything comes up, they are right there in first position, don't have anything that's going to come in and stop them if they needed to foreclose on the property.
Right.
So the homeowner's policy and the owner's policy is paid for by the seller. In the instance that you have a cash transaction,
Found this one out this week. I'm still learning from her every day.
It's all learning. We all learn every day. There's so much to learn in this business. It's always changing. The owner's policy in a cash transaction is paid for by the seller, and because the buyer is paying cash, not doing a loan, there's only one policy being issued in that transaction. Therefore, typically, and it can change, but most instances, both parties would have to close with the seller's title company. One, because they are paying for the policy, so they get to choose, right, who they're closing with.
Right.
And I have seen it where it's been negotiated and you can close with buyer's title or, and they pay, the seller still pays for the policy, but the seller actually has to close with title that the buyer chooses.
Yeah.
So it can be negotiated, but typically it's you close with the seller's title company because there's only one policy being issued in the transaction.
So when you have that, when a seller provides a title policy for the buyer on a cash deal, do you have to be careful and look through it? Can they try to not insure certain things? How does that work with?
No, it's pretty standard per the REPC, per the purchase contract.
Yeah, on what it covers.
Says, that the seller will provide a homeowner's policy of title insurance. Unless not available, they'll provide an owner's policy of title insurance. So, and the coverages, again, there's multiple title companies out there. We all have essentially the same product. We have multiple underwriters. So each title company has different underwriters they use, but we might have the same underwriter as X title company or so. When they're issuing those, the underwriter actually sets the policy and the policy premiums. So we're not the ones that are actually setting that.
Gotcha. Well, and it's so then if you're getting a loan, then it's one thing I want buyers to understand. If they're getting a loan, then there's another policy being issued, not from the seller, but from the buyer. And then at that point, can they decide who they want to work with, or do they still need to work with the seller's title company?
So are you saying like in a cash transaction, if they change their mind and decide to get a loan? No,
like if the buyer is like
typically doing a loan.
Getting a loan.
So buyers and sellers can choose who they want to use. If there's going to be two policies issued in the transaction, one for each side, they all get to choose who they want to use for title.
I think a lot of buyers don't realize that though. They're like, oh yeah, we'll close with the seller's title company,
and they don't have to because there are two separate policies being issued, so they do get to choose that.
What's that called when that happens?
A split closing.
Okay.
So Utah is known for split closings. There's states that don't do split closings. There's states that attorneys are the closers.
Right.
So, but in Utah, it's almost standard that you have split closings, right? It's just so common. And so a lot of times the buyer and seller are not closing at the same title company.
Yeah.
So that again is part of my job to coordinate with the other title companies and make sure everything's going smooth in the transaction as far as like closing and funding, recording and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. We have to be in communication with that other title company and let them know if we have a buyer side, hey, our buyer's lender's ready to go. We're going to
Yeah.
be closing this day, you know. Is your seller ready? You know,
Mhm.
so
Let's walk through some of the pros and cons of like a split closing, because there's a lot of cases where I like it, because if I have a buyer, and we're working on a deal, like I'll see the owner's policy come through from the seller's title company, and then if they choose to work with another title company, like I get another a lender's policy that's not really for them, but still, like it
Like a
shows.
double check.
Yeah, it's a double check. And so
Yeah.
I've seen those reports not necessarily aligned. So like I kind of like that, but then there's the whole other side of coordinating the closing, and like you guys have to wire to them, and then they have to fund and record. So it kind of adds in a few more steps. But I guess what are some of the pros and cons of
So, pros of, I mean, I don't know that you could really say pros and cons,
Yeah.
honestly. Like,
The differences,
the
maybe.
differences. So, if, you know, on a split closing, again, like I said, we as the title company are the ones that have to coordinate with the other title company. We need to
Mhm.
make sure that, like you were just talking about, you get the title commitment, or
Right.
we call it the PR sometimes,
right?
property report, title commitment.
So
And
yeah,
so-
why?
Yeah. Why and when do we get that? Why do we want a PR or a title commitment?
So, you, as a seller's agent, want to get the title commitment from your title company so you can see if there's any liens, you know, what's on title, what it shows. So the title report shows address, who the owners are, if there's any liens on title, what we as the title company need to do to make sure that title's free and clear in order to give it to the buyer.
So you want to do that before we list the house or anything? You want to find any
So-
bad stuff before we put it out there?
I recommend it, honestly. If you have a listing coming up, I recommend that you start a listing report with your title company,
Yeah.
so you can kind of get a preliminary view of what's out there. Because let's be honest, I mean, some things are just private to people, and if they have a judgment, they're not thinking that they're going to have to let you guys know that they
Mhm.
have a judgment.
Yeah.
But that's going to affect their transaction.
Or it might not even cross their mind that
Right.
it is something.
Or a divorce, like
yeah.
I mentioned
Right.
before. So that's something that just kind of gives you a quick heads up before you're under contract and have to like scramble to hurry and get something done. Like sometimes you have a cash deal or somebody that wants to close in 15 days.
Yeah.
And some things we can't get that quick,
Right.
Depending on what it is. Like federal tax liens, they usually take 30 to 45 days to get payoffs on
Right.
those. So, you know, a listing report or PR, title commitment, just kind of gives you as the seller's agent a heads up on what might be out there before you actually go under contract. If you have buyers, you want to have the seller's title report because I think it's part of the due diligence
Mhm.
of the
Yeah,
seller, or the
seller's
seller's
disclosures.
disclosures.
Yeah.
But again, you want to get that report so when we send you ours, the PR for the buyer side, that would insure the lender.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like Peyton was saying, you can compare because we're human. Everybody's human.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's things on there that maybe we didn't see, but you guys might see something
Mm-hmm.
out there that, and maybe we think it's standard, and you guys are like, wait a minute, this didn't match up. Why is there a difference? You know,
Right.
so like you were saying, it's good to have 2 sets of eyes, 4 sets of eyes. You know,
Mm-hmm.
different people looking at different things because we might see something that we're just like, yeah, that's done. We don't need to worry about it. And you guys are going, wait a minute, what is that? I noticed
Yeah.
they're not matching.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I agree. It's not necessarily pro and con because I don't think there's that many advantages or disadvantages to the other of having like split closings and stuff like that.
I mean, I would say one thing that could be a pro of closing all at one title company, both sides at one. A pro of that would be you're not waiting for wires to go back and
I
forth
agree.
for
Yeah.
funding and recording.
Well, and so there are cases where I love just having one or like minimal title companies involved. For example, if I have a listing and they're selling their house and they're buying a house and there's a buyer involved that's buying the house that they're selling, like there's 3 closings that have to go through.
Right.
And if you have 3 separate title companies, like that it can delay closing. Like it can just take more time. But if it's like all in house, it's like boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom. It happens really
I
fast.
just had one of those on
Yeah.
Monday.
Oh, really?
We call them dominoes.
Yeah.
I just had a domino, a 3-tier domino.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does. It could potentially delay because you're waiting on all 3 transactions to happen. And so, yes, if you were all closing with the same title company, it would make that process faster because we weren't having to wire out. That's the thing, like sending wires back and forth between title companies, everybody uses different banks. So you never know like
what day their wires
when
come
they're going to receive, you know, or
and the
like
cutoff
when we wire
times.
and cutoff times. Yeah. So
Well,
and all of us title companies have different title cutoff times with our banks, you know, to get wires out and stuff.
another thing is like signing on the houses. Like that would suck if you're selling your house with one company, buying a house with another, and you have to go here to sell and then here to sign on your sell and then here to sign on your buy.
Right.
Like it's nice when it's just like you're signing in the same spot,
Right.
you know?
And honestly, I've had that happen. And I'll say for myself and I would say for probably most escrow officers, we just want to do whatever is most convenient for your client.
Right. Yeah.
So in that case, I've done courtesy closings for other title companies if they're going to be at my office, you know, for my closing or whatever, and they're going to be supposed to be closing for whatever reason. There are other closings at another title company.
Right.
It comes up.
It does happen.
You know, but we just try to work with everybody and make it convenient and do what we can to make the transaction smooth. Because again, you've got 2 different transactions in there that you're trying to coordinate to make it all work in the long run.
So to make things kind of on a simpler basis, and this is where I want to be able to explain to one of my clients too that chooses to work with you, how does one get ready to work with Andi? What do we tell them to have ready to pull up for information you might need to help their process get smoother? Or because at the end of the day, when I first started, I didn't even know what title was, and they said call Andi, and it's how and
you're
what
like,
do you
what do
I
I
bring?
need?
Yep.
What do I need to give you? So if you're working with sellers, you want to prepare them that we're going to be reaching out. We're going to ask for personal information. We have to have social security numbers. And a lot of times, if they're not prepared for that, people back off when we call and say, hey, this is so-and-so with, you know, we're working with, and we need your social security number. And they're like,
A lot of scams
just
out
a
there.
minute, you know, which I totally understand. So we want you as the agent to let your sellers know that you're going to be, you know, we're going to be working with her, if, you know, however it works out. We'll be working with Andi, and her or her team will be reaching out to you to get information regarding payoff. If you have HOA, if you have solar panels, that's another one.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's a big one. So that we're going to be reaching out to get payoff information. We need lender information for who they currently have as their lender. We need contact information for the HOA so we can reach out to them and get their payoff statement. We need to get solar payoff or subordination if you're transferring that lien or, you know, working that process, however that goes. So not necessarily subordination in a sell transaction.
Right.
That kind of comes into play in refinance with
Right.
solar. But the lease transfer,
Right.
we have to start working with the solar company to make sure like everybody's on the same page with that. And with that, solar, it's kind of more gets put onto the sellers because they're the one that has to work with their solar company to make sure that they can transfer and that the buyer qualifies for that solar transfer too. So, but still information we have to have because one way or another, if they've got solar and a UCC file has been filed on the property, we have to figure out a way to clear it or know that it's being transferred over to the new buyer.
So if you were to say the first 3 things a buyer or a seller when a title agent calls to have ready, what would you say? Like a payoff letter?
Payoff social security number, and if they have HOA. That's typically the top 3 things.
I would just add in there too, like if it's in a trust or an LLC, you'll need those documents.
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. Good catch.
Yeah.
See?
So, see, he knows. He knows what he's doing.
exactly.
He doesn't need me here.
Well, we need it for like the listing because like we'll have a seller be like, hey, I want to sell my house. It's in a trust, and I'm like, Like who's signing? Like
So that brings up a good question too, because sometimes, say for instance, mom and dad have both passed away,
mhm.
and the kids think that it's in a trust. Come to find out it's not,
Then you have probate.
then they have to file probate, and
Yeah.
that can delay their plans for a month to 6 months. I mean, a probate, depending on how
Messy it
in
is.
depth it is, it
So-
could delay.
These are things that people never like think about, and neither do I. But I had a deal, I think it was a year or two ago. Property in Salt Lake. It was a small lot, but for some reason it was in separate parcel numbers. The house was on one, and then it had like a small section of ground with a really nice shop on it. Exact thing happened. The owner passed away. The house we found out was in a trust. The other parcel, not, like just in his name. And we
That's
were like
messy.
we were deep into this transaction, and then found out like, oh crap, like only half is in the trust. The other one needs to go to probate. Can it? I can't remember exactly how we worked that one out, but these are the things that come along. We were able to still get it closed and get everything figured out, and the buyers in there. But my clients at that time, like there were definitely some delays, and they're like, look, this doesn't happen, like we're out. And we ended up getting it, like making it happen. But you'd be surprised, like what you run into, and I'm sure you could say
Right.
story after story of stuff like that.
And in that case, I would say this, like with part of it being in a trust, I'm sure that made it easier for the second part to go to probate because you have the trust that dictates. So they wouldn't have to like go through and say, oh, send, I think they still have to notify heirs, but they already have it. The judge has it right there,
Yeah,
what was
right.
intended, right? So they could probably move that one through fast, which was, I'm
Probably
sure,
what
helpful
happened.
for your
Yeah.
situation. So
Yeah.
you could, but yes, trust and the power of attorney, that's another big one.
Yeah, that's true,
Sometimes
yeah.
people think that they can take care of property with power of attorney. However, if a property is in a trust, they can't use a power of attorney. The trust overrides the power of attorney.
Interesting.
So we've had that come up with even parents, elderly people that are still alive, but they don't want to deal with selling the house and they want their kids to deal with
Yeah.
it. So they're like, we'll just sign a power of attorney. And we're like, no, we can't have you do that. We'll either have to have a resignation from the trust to appoint the successor trustee or take it out of the trust, and
Yeah.
So is that something in the
which
in-
I wouldn't recommend. I would never recommend taking a property out of a trust.
So is that something that you as an escrow officer can help somebody set up? Not even selling or buying real estate, but getting older and I want to change the names on stuff, put it into trust.
Yes.
Are you who they call?
Yeah, well, I mean, no, we are not the ones that put the trust together. We're the one that
That
records the
changes the-
deed
okay.
that puts title into the trust. So, or sometimes attorneys will record the deeds nowadays. It's kind of more, now that there's electronic filing,
Yeah.
Okay.
or more attorneys are willing to record those deeds. A lot of times, like I was just talking about, parents have a trust. Kids thought their parents' home was in a trust, but what happened is the attorney put the deed in the back of their trust book, and they were supposed to go get it recorded, and they never did.
Yeah.
So we've had people bring in the books, the trust books, and here's this deed sitting in there unrecorded.
You're like,
That
you messed up.
at that
now,
point in
yeah.
time, it's
Too
probate.
late to, okay.
Yeah. So, we prepare if the attorney doesn't prepare that document, we can prepare the document for them, the warranty deed that puts it from their name individually into the trust.
Not to put you on the hot seat, but you already are, so I'll ask you anyways. But I had a client text me last night, and I haven't responded to him because I didn't know. He was like, hey, what? Let me read it. Where is it? Say, hey, wondering if you know how much does it typically cost deeding and recording cost? So if somebody just wanted to, like, for example, I have a few rentals. I want to put them into an LLC or my house into a trust. Like, is it expensive? What does that look like?
Recording costs are $45 per document if title's recording it. It's $40 with the county, and then there's Simplifile, the system that we all use, charges a $5 fee per document, electronic filing fee. So to record the document per document is $45 essentially.
So won't break the bank.
No, no. So
and they can just reach out to you, and you can help them with that pretty easy.
We can. We would charge like a document prep fee, and help them with the documents, which is usually not very much.
Yeah.
So it's not something that.
Under
It wasn't. So we were talking about before Peyton's technical errors happened.
this is why you hire a real videographer.
We were talking about how back before I was an agent, make sure that's on record. I had asked Andy, we were going on our honeymoon or something. We were leaving out of town, and had to be at the airport like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Ben's had a lot of honeymoons, by the way.
Right, yeah.
Don't ask his wife.
Right, yeah, don't ask Shaylee about it. But I asked Andy, I'm like, hey, we couldn't close until that next day. And I'm like, hey, can we just sign tonight, and then we'll just put different dates on all the documents, and we'll, you just file it tomorrow. And she very rudely looked at me and told me no, because apparently it's against the law, but met us at her office at 12:01.
She's a law-abiding citizen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a license to protect,
Right.
and that license feeds my family, so
It-
I'm going to make sure that it's covered. And no, with that, there's certain guidelines where
Right.
we can't. Lenders may not allow us to sign before their docs are dated, so that's what came into play with that situation. Is his docs were dated for the next day, and again, we just want to make sure we're following the rules. We don't want to have anything come up that might delay funding and recording.
No, that's impressive, though, because not everybody would do that.
Seriously,
So,
12:01, we opened up the office in the middle of the night. Probably got the police called on us.
just so you could go on your
Just
trip.
so we could go on our trip.
Just so
but
Ben and Shaylee made it to the airport by
But-
4. I
but
mean, they were like pretty tired-eyed and,
and
but
it actually gave me more of a confidence in Andy, because I was asking a big ask, and she was able to tell me, no, like, these are the rules, this is what I do, but here's how I can make it work.
Yeah.
So pretty awesome, really.
And that's who you need on your team, because like some people just go off of price, and like, please, you get what you pay for, and not that title companies vary that much. At the end of the day, it's basically sixes, but like brokerages, like there's definitely some big differences in what different agents will charge you and stuff. And I'm always like, we're definitely on the higher end, and it's like you get what you pay for. So
and that's very true. And I see that as well on my side of it, And again, I want everybody happy at the closing table.
Right.
So I want people to come in that are happy with their agent, that have had a great transaction with their agent, and their agent's been helpful, and it makes my job that much easier, than having to try to defend why this is happening and why that happened, and I've had those instances, and it's like, I think back and think, well, if you would have taken a little bit more time to research and find
the right
somebody that
team.
was concerned about you, then it would make the transaction better.
Yeah.
So
It definitely matters.
and I've seen that. I've seen that with Ben. I've seen that with you guys. Like, I enjoy the fact that you guys have happy clients at the closing table.
Yeah. Yeah, it can get scary. That's the last place you want things to get messy, is at the closing table.
Right.
Because there's money lost at that point. You're tied
And it
in.
has. I've been put in that position where I've had clients that were very unhappy with their agent, and he didn't come to the closing until like the last 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And then it was like they were
risking everything.
asking him why he even came.
Really?
Like, it was just awkward, Why put that in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like, and then at the same time, I'm like, well, this or that. And so, yeah, I don't like that situation. I like when people like who they're working with.
It's good to work with good people.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
It is.
Yep.
Pick your team wisely.
Yes, that's definitely what I'm saying.
Well, I have a few other questions. If you have a buyer that's paying cash, do they have to go in and sign? Do you need like wet ink signatures from them?
So, no, we actually don't.
That's crazy.
We can actually electronically sign a buyer that's paying cash, because there's nothing in the document set that needs to be notarized. So typically, if it's something that needs to be notarized, then we want them in the office so it can be signed. If it's a in-state closing, that we have different offices across the state.
Yeah.
We can coordinate closings at different offices in different counties, different cities. Typically, the raw notary that I talked about earlier,
Yeah.
I reserve those for out of state or country notaries.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I like to see people, I like to have that
Yeah.
relationship with them at the end, and make sure that they've had all their questions answered and they know what they're signing, they know why they're signing.
Yeah. Well, I love the closing table. You go there and it's like a celebration. Like you're there, like you're like signing the paper, like it's a big deal versus like logging onto your computer and like, sweet,
Right,
we just bought a
right.
property,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's kind of just the personal touch. You're putting that final touch on that transaction and again making sure that everything's taken care of for them, which I mean we do with the electronic signing for the buyers per se.
Mhm.
Buyer side cash still it's give or take, right?
Yeah.
I always give people the option. Like you can come into my office, we can do it. I can email you the documents. You can sign them, email them back, or I can send them electronically.
Mm-hmm.
Not all people are electronic savvy, so they
Right.
may not want it that way.
Ben.
But the thing is it's only about a 10-minute signing
Right.
because there's so few things that need to be signed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I give them the option. I've done all three ways, but I like to see people. I like to have them in the office.
Right. Let's talk about the difference. There's a lot of like confusion around like settlement.
I feel like I'm leaning away.
No, you're
And
good.
Settlement and closing.
I'll lean in.
Yes.
What is that?
So, I mean, it's settlement and closing versus funding and recording,
Yeah.
really is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Settlement and closing could be taken as the signing date.
Mm-hmm.
Recording and disbursement or funding is the date that the document actually records,
Yeah.
that the transaction is funded. We get money and we can record. So, per the purchase contract, it states in there that settlement and closing shall take place by the settlement date in the contract. But parties have actually 4 calendar days to fund that transaction. And I think that's where some confusion comes in sometimes is like a lot of people think settlement closing is the day that you sign and you fund and record.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
One,
get
we have to
keys.
get wires, money. We have to, we're waiting for their sale to close and fund so we can fund on the purchase, different things. So settlement and closing is typically what we would consider the signing date.
Right.
And then funding and recording is your final.
Yeah.
Like that's when it's
the
final.
house is yours.
We've gotten money and we've recorded the deeds.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people think they walk in, they sign the papers, and they're like, "Give me the keys," and you're like, "Wait, there's still like a few other things that have to happen here
and we
before
do.
you
We
get
have
the keys."
people that come in and they want their check at the closing table,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't understand. Like we all have to sign in order to get that check.
Right.
We have to have money. We have to sign first. All parties have to be signed,
Mm-hmm.
and however that money's coming in, the money has to come first, so we can record the transaction before we disperse.
Right. Yeah. There's a long list of things that goes down there that people don't see behind the scenes.
Right.
How about, can people bring you just like some
I was
cash?
just about to ask that. It's someone that pulls a mattress full of money into your front door and says, "I want to buy this house." Why can't we do that?
We don't take cash. We actually, as title companies, we actually have guidelines that we have to follow that come down from the state. We have a law, per se, that's the good funds law, the good funds regulation. It states that we have to receive good funds in order to fund that transaction. Good funds meaning cashier's check or wire.
Mm-hmm.
So, and cashier's check has to be cleared. So nowadays we're just kind of in the mode that we want wires for everything because the money comes in, it's available immediately,
It's quick. It's
and
there.
we can get our transaction done same day if needed, especially on a same day fund and close. The same day fund and close is where we sign with the buyers or sellers and fund that same day.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we do sign one day, fund the next day,
Yeah.
but we also do same days. On a same day transaction, we have to have good money in order because we're recording and giving that money away, right?
When
on
you
the
say
next side.
good money,
So wire, like
A
it
wire.
has to be
so it's
yes,
verified
it's
that it's
verified funds.
not, okay.
So if we take a cashier's check, then we have to make sure that that cashier's check clears the issuing bank before we can fund on that money.
And that takes a day, 2,
And-
3.
We can call we have to call. We have certain protocol that we have to follow. We call the bank, make sure that they issued the check.
Just a messier process.
And then
though,
2 or
than
3
wires.
days. Yeah. Can be 2 or
Yeah.
3 days before it can clear. And which honestly, like it could take even longer than that. And it kind of comes into play with wires with earnest money.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've had situations where people have brought in personal checks or cashier's checks for earnest money and then turn around and their contract cancels and they want their money back, but we can't release it because their check hasn't cleared. So we have to make sure we have the money to be able to release it back to them.
Yeah.
So, and so we just like to have wires.
Yeah.
Anything over $10,000 has to be a wire no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Cashier's checks, we're lenient on under 10,000, but we have to follow that rule. We prefer wires.
Yeah. I remember back in the day when homes were cheaper, like it was fairly common. Like I would see buyers bring in a check for like $7 or $8 grand, but like now that barely covers your closing costs. So
Right.
yeah, it's definitely changed.
I remember days when people would bring cashier's checks into closing for their whole purchase price.
Yeah.
But there's so much fraud out there nowadays that
Like to buy
even
a house with
even the
fake paper,
cashier's
yeah.
checks, like you have to make sure that that the funds are good wherever they're coming from.
Well, Andy, this has been amazing. Do you feel like there's anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention or anything like that, Ben?
I think for me, it's just when you're working with clients, just kind of give them the expectation that they're also going to be working with title.
Mm-hmm.
And title is involved, and there's certain things that we're going to be reaching out for, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And just let them know. Sometimes we'll get a hold of them right up front, and then they may not hear anything. It's kind of a waiting game.
Yeah.
Whether it's a buyer or a seller side, we kind of, the way it works is we have a hurry up and get this file ready. Now we're waiting for either side of the parties on either side, whatever's happening with theirs.
Yeah.
If you're working with a seller, we're waiting for the buyer and their lender to get things in place. So there's really nothing in between that time period.
How do you feel once you get into a process like that? Because obviously there is certain days, and we know that you're working and doing stuff. If a client's concerned, or sometimes a client really just wants to hear, and I can say, "Oh, Andy's working it. She's got it." But what was your thoughts on if a client reached out and say, "Hey, Andy, how's it going?" I've seen she's reached back out to a couple of my clients and given them a breakdown of what she's done. So
yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we don't want to have people sitting in the dark and just like wondering what's happening, But again, that's kind of part of team.
Yeah.
right.
And so all together as a team, you want to all make sure, be aware that the clients may not know what is going on in the backside, but between all of us, just keeping everyone informed on the transaction, but also letting them know or giving them that expectation that there could be lulls. There might be days you're not hearing anything, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to start like a podcast and video, because like we're kind of the connecting pieces for a lot of people to like title contacts, lenders, inspectors. Like we work with so many different people, and I've seen like there's huge differences between who you work with and like how the deal goes and everything. So I wanted to do this because now people are like, they're able to get to know you, your style, what you do. Like you'll meet people at 1201, maybe not everybody, but like it's happened. Like you're willing to do what it takes
if it needs to be done,
to get the deal across the table. And that matters, And so that's why these are like so helpful. And then educating people on the process so they know that like, oh, I'm a buyer and I'm getting a loan. I can choose what title company I want to work with. Like just giving them the knowledge and the resources there, and then knowing that communication will be there throughout the process to keep them in the loop.
Right. And I'm always available.
Yeah.
People have my cell number. I'm not afraid to give it out. Like,
in fact, when we were doing the podcast, she's like, "Hey, Peyton, can I have my phone right here? Because there's this deal that's like I need to be available for." So like that's how available she is.
Right.
we don't take breaks like 24/7.
I don't know. I've probably 10 times I've called you on personal deals, and Andy has talked me off the ledge, explained to me a process, like, hey, the world's not after you on this one. This is what's going on.
I mean, sometimes
it's
we're
true.
counselors, just like you guys are. It kind of goes with the business, But again, it all just comes down to the fact that we're here for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about us.
Right.
It's about them, and it's buying or selling a house is a big transaction. Like, that's a major life thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, whatever you can do to make or take stress off their plate,
Right.
you know. And for me, it's more like closings, right? Like making it convenient, like working, or because they may have to take time off work to move.
Yeah.
Like, they don't need to take time off work to close.
Yeah.
And people run into that, you know, well, my boss won't,
No, it's
which is fine. We can accommodate, you know.
kind of like having a baby. Like, it's a big life change. Like, you're changing where like your home base, you
Right,
know? Everything
right.
changes. And so the more stress you can take off that, the better.
Exactly. And that's kind of just always been my motto, you know.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about me.
It's about the client.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. And
Thanks for having me. I
Well,
appreciate it.
we'll make links
been
to
fun.
your
Contact info.
contact info and everything so they can reach out to you. And
Yeah.
I'm sure.
If anybody has questions, I'd love to help. Just even answer questions. Or we talked about the trust thing. You know,
Mhm.
if people are concerned, if you know what their parents' property is, hey, reach out. We can just do a quick
Yeah.
look to see if it's in a trust or not.
Yeah, there's so much work that can be done prior that just by like a simple phone call, consulting with you, will go a long ways.
Right.
Whether you're buying or selling or not, or just working on your properties yourself,
Yeah,
you know.
getting your things set up right with the attorney and stuff
Yep.
in
Right.
the LLC, the trust. Like, I have a trust and my house is not in it, and I need to do that.
Yes,
So
you
thank
do.
you for reminding me.
rental properties, getting them organized and
Yeah.
put into different. I need to have a sit down with you. So
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
Very insightful.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.